Hello, and welcome from the PDI Security Operations Center. So thank you for joining us today for the Q1 2026 edition of the PDI Cyber Threat Landscape Report. I'll be your host for today's presentation. Today, we're going to be talking about our threat findings from last quarter and sharing our analysis on the current trends in cybercrime. I would like to go ahead and introduce you to our speakers for today, Mr. Justin Hurd and Josh Smith. Justin is the Director of Security Operations here at PDI, and he brings over 16 years of cybersecurity experience to the forefront. His career has been characterized by an excellence in a range of roles, from threat hunter to incident commander and intelligence analyst. Josh is our Supervisor of Threat Intelligence, who works closely in organizational threat landscapes, creating threat intelligence and authoring these quarterly threat landscape reports. He holds a master's degree in cybersecurity technology and previously served with the United States Navy as an operations specialist with 14 years of service. Before I hand it over to them, let's quickly cover for our agenda for today. First, we're going to go over our methodology and overview, how we gather this threat data and what we do with it. Then we're going to take a look at our 3 different data sets that we snapshot this threat report: our ransomware section, our dark web section, and then exploits. At the end of each of these sections, we'll wrap up with specific recommendation and mitigation measures that you can use to protect your business. Finally, we'll review what all these means for your business and provide an overall list of conclusions and recommendations. With all that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Justin to kick things off with our methodology.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is just kind of an overview of how we get to where we're at. And this is a collection of all the data that we have within our systems that we do research on. We kind of bring it all together. So process-wise, we're gathering all the intelligence that we can from technical systems, as well as news articles, as well as our own data and alerts, investigations that we do here at PDI. We kind of process that data. We can build detections out of that data, which those are alerts that we can send to different customers, so on and so forth. We kind of scrutinize, evaluate that data, bring it together into something that's useful for us. And then ultimately we disseminate it. This is a form of dissemination today. So we'll be disseminating all the information that we've collected over Q2 for our threat intelligence, and kind of give you an idea of the trends and different things that we're seeing to help us better prepare organizations for the future.
All right, starting to talk with our section about ransomware specifically here. Let's discuss at a very high level, what is ransomware, what's the life cycle, and what happens with ransomware. Specifically, what we look at first is these operators have to find a way into a victim's network. How do they gain that initial access into it? Typically, what we see is they're either going to use something like an exposed vulnerability for a service or a server. These can be old vulnerabilities. They can be new ones as well. Or typically what we're going to see is they're going to log into a network. And how do they log in? Either through things like social engineering attacks, where they're stealing someone's credentials, or they're purchasing these from other operators on the dark web. So then when we look at ransomware specifically, what are these operators? What are they doing? Typically, they're financially motivated. Your ransomware operators don't typically have an ideology. They don't care what a business is. What they're looking for is how financially they can benefit from attacking that organization. So with that, some do have moral codes where they'll maybe try to shift away from things such as like a charity or an education or hospitals. Others don't care at all. They'll attack anything and will be very, very opportunistic. They seek the path of least resistance. When they do this, they're using their tactics, again, things such as phishing or exploiting these vulnerabilities or purchasing these credentials on the dark web to get into the network. Once they're in, they begin to laterally move, scanning the network, seeing the other devices they can speak with. Once they find these devices, they begin to poke and prod to see, can they log into those, or can they find a vulnerability on the internal network with software and be able to move into those other devices as well. Once they gather up all this different real estate digitally, they're then looking at a way of how can they persist within the network. If someone detects them and they remove that first initial access they got, do they have a way that they can still remain within the network? Once persistence is established, they begin to look at what's on the network, what data is sensitive, is there PII, is there internal documents, all those different things like that. Gather up as much of it as they can, and they exfiltrate all that data off of the network. Once that's exfiltrated, they then turn around and they deploy their encryption and encrypt the entire network, effectively shutting it down. When we look at ransomware in general for Q4 of 2025, we did see an increase of about 61% in activity versus Q3. The way that we measure our activity of ransomware operators, we look at the extortion publications that they publish on their dark web websites. What an extortion publication is, if you're not familiar, is basically once a threat actor has launched a successful attack and they've exfiltrated that data I was speaking about, they typically publish a sample of that somewhere on their dark website to say, look, we breached organization. Here is a sample of the data we stole from them. If you don't pay the ransom that we're asking you to pay, we're going to either release all of the data publicly or we're going to sell this to other threat actors. So tracking those extortion publications on websites, that's where we saw that increase at. The largest sector that we saw an increase against was the retail sector when we compare Q3 to Q4. With that being said, every sector from Q3 to Q4 saw a very large increase of at least 25% or above, some seeing very dramatic increases. When we look at the ransomware operator specifically, Quillen continued to be operating as one of the largest and most successful ransomware operators. And this likely has to do with the fact that they're what they call a ransomware as a service. Just like you can go subscribe to a Office product and get a subscription key to it, it's very similar to how the ransomware operators will operate their quote unquote business, if you will, at this point. They basically are going ahead and selling a license to their ransomware. They will provide you support. They will tell you if you have troubleshooting issues, all those things just like a regular vendor would. What they do on the side of it is anytime a ransomware operator makes a successful ransom, they take 20% of that profit for themselves and continue to sell the software to anyone out there on the dark web who will purchase it. Their affiliates tend to continue to operate and focus specifically on these large enterprise scale disruptions, and these can directly lead to downtime and regulatory exposure. When we look at 2025 as a whole, we saw a 35% increase from 2024 to 2025. The peak month of this activity was in October, and the majority of these ransomware operators now are utilizing what we call double or triple extortion methods. So the double and triple extortion method, basically what we're looking at is where I described earlier about taking that sample data and publishing it on their site. That's that second layer of pressure, if you will. The first being, we want ransom money from you. Now we're seeing some operators that are leaning into what we call a triple extortion method, where not only are they putting that data up for sample and for sale, they're now turning around and saying, we're going to take information on potentially the CEO and harass them personally. We're going to take client data and harass clients. We're going to perform a distributed denial of service attack on your websites. They're finding a third angle, basically, to apply that pressure to get someone to pay the negotiations. So when we look at the different methods of how these ransomware attackers are getting in, we've mentioned a few of them already, but nonetheless, what we are seeing here is, again, a number of phishing attacks, and now even more leaning into social engineering attacks, things such as ClickFix, which we'll talk about further in our exploit section. What we're also seeing, again, is they're constantly scanning the internet, looking for exposed servers and software applications, and looking to see, are they insecurely configured, or do they have known vulnerabilities available for them? And if so, they're striking and attacking those to try to find the way in the network that way. Additionally, supply chain attacks. Not only are they looking to go ahead and see if they can get into a specific organization, but if there's a larger organization that provides software and services to multiple underneath them in that umbrella, if they can get that top organization, they now have access to all of the organizations underneath them as a supply chain attack. Those are very, very lucrative and very attractive to threat actors. Additionally, they're looking at initial access brokers, which has a lot to do with the dark web section we'll talk about. But basically, it's these folks that go through, they launch the initial attack, they find their way into a network, and they don't want to do anything further with the attack. Once they've gotten that access, they resell that access to other operators who will then launch their ransomware attack or whatever attack they want to. And then lastly, still brute forcing or credential stuffing is a prevalent way. Threat actors will take these giant lists of usernames and passwords and just constantly try them against a login page to try to find their way to see if any of those are successful. When we look at our top ransomware operators in general, as I mentioned before, Quillen remains very, very active. Akira, Inc. Ransomware, those are some of your very top ransomware groups. Lockbit was one of the most prevalent ransomware operators in 2024 and has fallen off very, very hard through 2025, basically due to the law enforcement disruption that they witnessed. Although Lockbit has announced a new version now, a 5.0, and with that announcement, we may see a bit of a revitalization with them in 2026. Time will tell, and we'll continue to monitor for that. I would expect, though, these ransomware operators that I've mentioned and that we see here in general to be very prevalent and maintain their levels of activity unless they are disrupted by future law enforcement operations. When we look at ransomware extortions by industry in 2025, manufacturing still remains one of the most successful targets for ransomware operators. A lot of this likely has to do with the fact that they have these legacy technologies, these high levels of operational pressure, and they may have a less of a focus on cybersecurity. Any type of downtime for manufacturing is an immediate financial pain, and so that can prevent things such as applying patches for vulnerabilities when they're announced. These systems operationally don't want to be taken offline because that costs financial pain, and so they're not applied, and the threat actors can take advantage of that. Additionally, these ransomware operators know that if they are able to get into a manufacturing organization and shut down the network because of that financial pain, they might be more apt to go ahead and pay the ransom to get operations back up and running. Additionally, the same thing applies for the number two one, healthcare as well, where operational downtime in this industry can be a literal difference between life and death. And because of that, hospitals may be more apt to go ahead and pay the ransom to get operations back online.
All right, thank you, Josh. Yeah, a lot of information out there on ransomware, a lot of activity. The big increase that we saw. So the big question that everybody probably has is, how do we mitigate this, right? How do we make ourselves less of a target, and how do we respond when it comes to these threats? First and foremost, EDR, very good system for helping us with post-exploitation and exploitation. Of malware attacks, because it kind of shows us what's happening on the endpoint, and it's very technique based as opposed to signatures and so on and so forth, which is a kind of a mixture of both, an AV with the heuristics part of picking up things happening on the endpoints that shouldn't be happening, and so it gives you a fair chance of responding quickly, especially in that early phase that Josh talked about with the discovery, where they're just kind of scanning the network, they're using known tools. Those are things we can pick up on with an EDR system. The next thing is data backup and recovery plan. This is very important because at the end of the day, even with the layered approach, there's a possibility that you will have impact, but if you get hit by ransomware, things will get encrypted, so on and so forth. And so kind of understanding what that looks like, and how you would recover in the midst of that is very important. And even things like tabletops, just kind of practice and say, hey, if this thing went away, is there a way that we can recover from it? And that's kind of where the planning stage comes. And that's the best thing you can do is be prepared for the worst, right? And that starts with that data backup and recovery plan. The last one here is cybersecurity awareness and training. Some of the tactics that Josh mentioned were VPNs, phishing, password management for employees can be something that's very important, using some type of password management where they're not reusing passwords on multiple sites, on their home PCs, where maybe they have some type of credential scraping or anything, something happening there that bleeds over into the corporate world, their corporate VPN, so on and so forth. So always making everyone aware of things they can do to keep themselves safe, and just being curious, right? If something doesn't look right, bring it up to the right officials within your organization, and just have them take a look at it, especially when it comes to emails and going to different websites and links that could lead to exploitation of the network. All right. Pass it back over to Josh here.
As we move into the dark web section, discuss it next. The dark web contains a numerous set of underground websites, these private access forums, and these typically require special configuration and tooling to access, as well as usually an invitation and another threat actor to vouch for you to be able to get into them. These threat actors also will additionally use things such as private encrypted messaging platforms, things like Telegram or WhatsApp, to be able to coordinate and discuss these different operations. Ultimately, what the dark web is, if you get at a technical level, it's just things that the general internet can't find. If you go to whatever your favorite search engine is and type in that information, it's not indexed and found by them. So you need this special configuration and knowledge to be able to access these underground sites. Within this ecosystem, these threat actors will discuss things such as newly found vulnerabilities, exploits that they're developing, stolen credentials, stolen databases, and will trade and sell and exchange all of this data. Being able to monitor some of this gives us a bit of a leg up as defenders to be able to see what's interesting to them right now, what topics are being done, and then also being able to configure alerting around that to be able to get an idea of when something's being discussed that's prevalent to us specifically. So ransomware operators too will coordinate with these initial access brokers I discussed in the previous section to buy access that they've already gotten, and from there get in, establish their own persistence, and then launch an attack. When we look at Q4 specifically for the dark web, we saw activity decrease by about 10%. One of the things that we track very heavily when it comes to dark web is the activity of information stealers or info stealers. One of the largest ones that's been the most prevalent is Luma Stealer, and Luma Stealer saw some law enforcement action against them, which slowed everything down and pretty much shut down their operations. With that, we saw this decrease, this power vacuum, if you will, within that space that's been slowly starting to be reestablished by threat actors as they're figuring out what their new favorite flavor of InfoStealer is. Some of the ones that are surging up overall and we're starting to see bubble to the top are things such as Vidar, which surged over 138% in Q4, Creed, which is a newer flavor of InfoStealer, and Ramadanthus, which is an older one, which has started to resurge in activity as well. These info stealers remain popular tools for threat actors because if they can distribute them, let's say through phishing or a fake, hey, your computer's outdated, you need to download an update on the internet and install this info stealer, it can then go out onto the victim's device, look for things such as passwords that are saved in browsers, sensitive banking information, cryptocurrency information, and more. After that, it can gather up all that data and send it over to the threat actor. And additionally, some of these too can provide just straight remote access to the computer as well too, giving that initial access. And this is where you'll find then those threat actors will resell that on the dark web to other threat actors that want to launch further attacks. And so if we look at dark web in general for 2025, activity decreased by about 25% compared to 2024. June was the most active month for info stealers that we saw. And what we do think too that we're seeing as a bit in this decrease is that threat actors are also starting to pivot away from some of these dark web forums and moving more into Telegram, Discord, WhatsApp, things like that, because they have a little bit more control and visibility on who's in there and what's not. They can also get a good gauge for how active people are in there, and they can kind of prune the access list a little bit easier there. Additionally, too, if they need to, they can burn that channel if they feel like it's compromised and spin a new one up very, very quickly compared to reestablishing an entire new forum. So I think some of the activity decreases we're seeing too is as we're monitoring some of these forums is because that activity is shifting to these other channels. Then when we look at Luma Stealer, discussing Luma Stealer as we did before, we saw this large year-over-year drop attributed to that law enforcement disruption. Even with that disruption, though, and to really emphasize how big of a thing Luma was, it was still the most prominent info stealer used in 2025. As mentioned before, with that power vacuum, we're finding other variants starting to come in and fill that, things such as Vidar, Creed, and Ramadanthus.
All right, just to jump right into it, we talked a lot about data and data being stolen and published. And so these are a couple things that we can do to help protect ourselves from some of these types of attack or leaking credentials. And the first and foremost thing is to be aware that you're missing credentials or there's data out there. And so that's where web monitoring services and threat intelligence can help with that. Mainly, scanning the dark web for information that's that references your company or your domains or your emails is very important. You can also pick up on typo squatted domains where someone's set up a domain that's kind of like yours, and maybe hosting things that looks like your services or your website. So people enter their passwords, download things, without fear. Uh, and ultimately get infected. So understand that data is out there. So having that dark web monitoring service to be able to pick up on if a user's password from in your domain shows up on the internet on the dark web can really help because then hey, this information's out there for one, so you can take action as far as changing passwords, but you can also do some threat hunting and to make sure that that user hasn't been doing anything that's outside of their normal activity. Always implementing comprehensive security measures, having a layered approach. We talked about EDR, firewalls, gateways, software updates. All those things are going to help mitigate from credential leaks or the use of those valid credentials to do harm to your environment. Enhanced data protection and privacy, making sure that you're using a password manager if possible. MFA is super important. If you assume that everyone, a password within inside your network will someday be stolen, if you have MFA, it really makes it almost impossible or very difficult to be able to get into that account, especially when you have external facing things like VPNs or portals that are accessible via the web, which is another target that threat actors may go after. Last one here, and you'll see a theme here: educate and train user awareness, right? Phishing, social engineering attacks, all these things to understand how they work and what the end goal is for your end users, really help them to identify when something's not looking right. So I'll pass it back over to Josh for exploits.
And moving into our last section of exploit activity, exploitation of vulnerabilities still remains one of the most prevalent ways that threat actors gain access into networks. Threat actors are consistently scanning the open internet nonstop for exposed infrastructure, and they begin probing it for weaknesses immediately. Without a doubt, if you take a device and connect it to the open internet, very, very quickly, you're going to start finding different IP addresses from all over the world. They're going to immediately start pinging it and scanning it to see what it is and what it may be vulnerable against. This level of automation of scanning as well as just probing allows these threat actors to very quickly find when there are vulnerable exposed devices, and that's one of the reasons why they still look for these old vulnerabilities as well too, to see if maybe a misconfiguration of firewall suddenly happens and maybe an old legacy device suddenly gets exposed to the internet. They can take advantage of that very, very quickly. So with that, we witnessed almost an 80% increase in exploit activity when we compare that to Q3. Like as I said, old vulnerabilities are still very much targeted, and new ones are also very focused on quickly as well too. A lot of this activity is becoming fully automated. As we see advances in AI, it's lowering that technical bar that's needed for these criminals to be able to come in and learn how to take advantage of these vulnerabilities. When we compare this also to something like 2024 to 2025, we saw an over a 200% increase in exploit activity. Again, I believe a lot of this has to do with the fact of automation and AI assistance, if you will, for these threat actors that can now use that to help them code malicious things, research vulnerabilities. You can take one of those LLMs and create it on your own and train it to do malicious things. Obviously, if you start using one of the more commercialized ones, there's a lot of roadblocks and guards in there. They'll stop you and say, hey, I can't give you that information. That's why they build their own. They take those models and build their own malicious ones that are designed specifically to give them information on vulnerabilities, encode malware, and things like that. there's a dramatic increase in that, and that lowers that technical bar to where you don't have to be this expert coder to be a master hacker, malicious bad guy. You can just be a guy who's interested in criminal activity and starting to get into it now. Because of these lower bars, we're seeing this type of activity increase, and that low-hanging fruit of exploits becomes much more prevalent for these threat actors now to take advantage of. Additionally, threat actors are always very, very interested in things such as vulnerabilities with VPNs. If there are firewall management portals that are exposed to the internet, maybe there's authentication bypass vulnerability to get around that login portal and get into the firewall. If you have a server that's pointing to the open internet that has misconfiguration in it or vulnerable software, and camera systems too. Camera systems are often misconfigured or insecurely configured and are left to the open internet. Threat actors are looking for vulnerabilities involving those too and are taking advantage of them as soon as they can. Additionally, we talked earlier in one of the sections specifically about social engineering attacks when it comes to getting into a network. A lot of times when people think of these types of attacks and these attackers, it's always a technical mind frame, when really the most easy way for a threat actor is the human element of it. If you have all of the technology in the world, but you can convince the user to bypass that or just allow you to log into their network, doesn't matter what you have there. They have authenticated access at that point and they're able to get in. So one of the things they can do is, again, credential harvesting and trying to get that things from them. Or what we're seeing here now too, another type of social engineering tactic is an attack called ClickFix. And so what ClickFix is if you've ever been on the internet and you see one of those CAPTCHA pops up that wants you to verify you're human before you log on to a website. One of those reasons why we see those is to try to minimize some of that automated activity on the internet to prove it's real humans. But they've now taken that and they've weaponized it. So you have that little pop-up that shows up for a user and it says, hey, verify you are human. To do so, copy and paste this code into your Windows command line and hit enter. Doing so will prove to me you're a human and I'll give you access to this website. Realistically, what they've done at that point is they've taken malicious code, run it on their device, and it's reached out and downloaded a malicious payload. That's now giving the threat actor access to their device and they can log into it. That's one flavor of it. There are tons of variants of this ClickFix where you may instead say, for you to access this file, you need to download and run this command to be able to fix a missing file you have or an outdated file. You go to a website and it says, hey, you're missing this driver to be able to access the website you want to go to. Anyway, though, the common themality throughout this is the fact that they want you to copy code, paste it into your command line or into the PowerShell terminal. If you see that, that's a major red flag. And if there's anything I could drive to have you explain to your organization in cybersecurity awareness training, phishing's normally beaten to death, which is a great thing, but this is rising. It is a big deal and is becoming way more prevalent. You need to make sure folks understand they should not be copying random commands from the internet and pasting that into something on their device. If they see something like that, they should inform their IT or security staff or whatever your internal policy is to make sure that nothing malicious has happened on that machine.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we can do. Josh touched a little bit on it, but speedy system patching is crucial. Understanding what patches are out there, that means kind of monitoring the vendors that you use for information coming out there, CVEs, really understanding the information coming out. 0 days, what you can do to mitigate those if there's not a patch yet. Are very important, and the faster you can do it, the better off you are, right? Because the threat actors get the same information that we're getting and saying, hey, there's this new exploit, and they're write a script and they're gonna start scanning for that exploit, and then go to town on trying to get into the network or exploit that vulnerability in whatever system, especially when it comes to edge-facing systems like VPNs or portals and so on and so on and so forth. Use the firewall with IPS. So there are IPS signatures that can help us with some of the lower level intrusion prevention stuff that we can hit, the different exploits that go out. We can block those immediately at the edge without having to worry about post-exploitation things happening past that. Monitoring security news and vendor security bulletins. We touched on that already, but basically being aware, being on those sites, having some type of feed of information that comes to you regarding the different vendors that you're using, so you can be aware that there is a patch out there. Along with that comes vulnerability management. So doing vulnerability scans, understanding what's crucial there, and kind of figuring out how to prioritize the patching list. Patching's not easy. It can be disruptive, but it's very important because security events inside your network can be just as disruptive, if not more disruptive, than trying to get the patches pushed out. And the last thing here is just basic network hygiene, right? Disable unused services and ports, things that you don't need. That way, there's not a system out there that you don't know about or a different way into the network that's not really monitored. So just kind of cleaning up that network, cleaning up those firewall policies, and making sure that the perimeter is very secure from some of those exploits as well. And we will wrap all this up with kind of some 6 high-level things, that we've touched on throughout this presentation, but we'll touch on them again just to kind of wrap this up for us. Educate all users often. This is that user awareness piece, and it's very important. Taking a layered approach to security. There's not one magic bullet. There's no silver bullet to security. It is a larger approach from planning. We talked about planning a little bit, to the technical things that you have, to the different softwares, to the management of the whole network, and keeping that network hygiene good. And then patching things, which brings us to the third one. Patch your tech stack as often as possible, and stay up to date on all the information that your vendors are sending out there. I like to use things like Twitter. There's different feeds like Feedly that can just pull in a bunch of information for you. RSS feeds are great, or just going to the vendors' websites every week and checking that out. Update your malware protection. This is just making sure everything's updated so we have new signatures, so we can block things that are already known. Segregate high-risk devices, but also understand what the high-risk devices are. It's very important. And the last one here is utilize threat intelligence, because sometimes you can get ahead before exploitation, before post-exploitation. You can see that there's some staging activity going on, right? They spun up a typo squat domain. They can do things like doing poisoning of the SOE poisoning, so they bring their website up to the top. So yours kind of falls below. And so if someone thinks they're going to you, if they Google search and they're actually going to the threat actor, which can be bad as well. So those are things that we can kind of do as a whole, right? Taking that layered approach, a lot of different areas to touch on here to help protect ourselves against some of these things that Josh shared with us today.
Thank you, Justin and Josh, for sharing those critical highlights and recommendations from the newest report. Before we sign off, I want to briefly touch on what today's threat landscape means for your business. As we've seen through this presentation, cyber threats go beyond just technical headaches. They carry severe real-world consequences. A successful attack introduces the immediate risk of operational downtime and reduced network performance. It also creates difficulty compliance challenges, increases your fraud liability, and ultimately threatens you with the potential loss of hard-earned customer loyalty. That is exactly why PDI Technologies is here, to help you implement these layered security measures we discussed today. At PDI, we specialize in providing solutions tailored specifically for retail and petroleum wholesale businesses, because we know that operational downtime in retail can cause immediate financial pain. We offer PDI's always-on ecosystem. This ecosystem combines our integrated network and management with our 24/7 security operations center services. Simply put, our solutions work better together. By unifying your network management and your cybersecurity defenses under one umbrella, we simplify compliance and ensure your business stays secure, connected, and always on. For more information about our SOC services or to explore free cybersecurity resources we have available, please visit us on our website at pditechnologies.com. On behalf of the Security and Network Solutions team here at PDI, thank you again for joining us and have a great rest of your day.